Welcome, everyone. I hope folks are having a good day. We're going to get started momentarily as folks are joining. Give it another couple seconds and I'll go into housekeeping. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Kate Wells. I am the program director at NICL, National Council on Independent Living, and I support the IL network to coordinate logistics and these webinars that you all are attending. So today's webinar is Understanding the Role of Independent Living Network Before, During, and After a Disaster. We had over 400 folks register for this webinar, so it seems to be a popular one where folks really are craving information. So today's presentation is brought to you by the Administration for Community Living at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in conjunction with the ILNet. And Dion, you can go next slide. Great. ILNet is operated by IRLU in collaboration with NICL, National Council on Independent Living, April, and the University of Montana. And next slide. And the logos of each of those organizations are on the screen. Giving you a brief visual description of myself, my pronouns are she, her. I'm a white almost 30-year-old female wearing a black and gray sweater and wearing headphones. So just a few housekeeping details. Captions are available today for the webinar. You can click Show Subtitle in your Zoom menu bar to turn them on. We also have captions running via AI Media. The URL is a little too long to say out loud, so we will put that in the chat. Using this link, you'll be able to enlarge the font, change color and contrast of the captioning. ASL interpreters are also present today and should always be visible as we're presenting in gallery view. Please let us know if you cannot see the ASL interpreters. We also have Spanish translation available, interpretation available. In order to access that, you can go to your Zoom bar on your screen and choose the language that you would like to hear the presentation in. And I just got a message chat, the audio. Is audio okay on my end before I continue?
I can hear you, Mary Kate.
Okay.
If anybody else is listening in and cannot hear, can you just put that in the chat for us? Okay, it looks like, so I will reach out to the person that wrote that for us.
Great, I just want to make sure. All right, so to continue, we will read all the content that's on the slides and any questions in the chat Q&A box out loud so that folks calling in or who cannot see the visual content. Public chat is off, but you are able to chat the host and panelists. We just ask that you reserve the chat for technical support only. And please do not use the chat to submit questions to the panelists. To submit questions, questions will be saved to the end of the webinar. You're welcome to submit questions throughout the webinar. If a question is relevant on the current slide, it might be answered. There's a few easy ways to submit questions. If you are in Zoom, you can simply type your question in the Zoom Q&A tab. You're also welcome to email me at mary-kate@nicl.org, and I'll put that in the chat. And finally, if you are on the phone today, you may press *9 to indicate that you have a question. When you're selected, if you are using a touch tone phone, you can press *6 to unmute yourself, and we ask that you limit your question to no more than 30 seconds. So with all of that, before I introduce our first speaker and moderator of this webinar, I would ask if at the end of the webinar that you all would consider filling out our evaluation form. We greatly appreciate any and all feedback, and that will be put in the chat and as well as pop up on the screen. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Ed Ahern to turn his camera on and come on the screen. Ed is Aging and Disability Program Coordinator in the Office of Independent Living at the Administration on Community Living. And he is going to kick off our conversation today about disaster before, during, and after in the independent living movement. So Ed, I will hand it off to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ed Ahern. I'm a 60-ish-year-old man with brown hair and a brown and gray beard and glasses and a striped shirt. And I'm so excited to be here today. A little bit about me. I'm a former SIL consumer, turned volunteer, turned board member, turned skills trainer, and in the end, turned executive director. Following my many years of SIL work, I spent 7 years as a disability integration specialist at FEMA, where I saw the disparity people with disabilities were facing following a disaster. I've been deployed more than 20 times. Across ACL, there's a strong commitment to supporting our networks before, during, and after a disaster. So here in the Office of Independent Living Programs, we are ongoing supporting our SIL and networks in preparing for responding to a disaster, emergency, or public health declaration. So this FAQ that we're going to be talking about today and this webinar are just one way that we're offering support. And throughout this webinar, you'll hear about lots of ways that there is support out there. I'm joined today by the co-executive directors of the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies. Since joining ACL in 2022, I have seen the strong support the partnership has provided to IL Network, to SILs, to SILCs, to IL partners, as well as the knowledge and leadership they bring to disaster and the disability conversation. Herman and Shaylin, would you like to introduce yourself and the partnership, please?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shaylin Sluzalis, alongside
Herman Parodi.
As Ed mentioned, we are the co-executive directors of the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies, and we go by the partnership in short, as we know that can be quite a mouthful. We are the nation's disability and disaster hub, led by and for people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters and emergencies. And looking forward to the conversation today with you all.
An image description of us: I am a brown-skinned Puerto Rican man, and I use he/el pronouns.
And I am a younger white woman with long brown curly hair, wearing a black jacket, and behind us is a desk with a mandala tapestry behind us, and I use she/her pronouns.
Thank you, Ed.
And if we could move to slide 9, perhaps, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. We're also going to be joined today by members of the community, the IL community. We'll let them introduce themselves during that portion of that. But we're very excited. Over the past 2 years, we have seen increases. Oh, next slide, please. The next one, please. Okay. Over the last 2 years, we have seen increases in the number and frequency of disasters, with SILs and SILCs impacted in some way by disaster activity. 2 examples, we see the ongoing Maui recovery and public health. We're also seeing lots of centers that are still playing a very important role in the public health and the COVID work that's still going on, including information on testing, on vaccinations. So we'll start with the webinar with the discussion of the FAQ, then we'll be followed by our panel before we move on to a discussion specifically around SPIL and SILC goals. And then lastly, we look forward to hearing about your experiences and answering questions or providing input on questions or feedback that you might have. Next slide, please. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go back one, please. Before I start, I think it's important, and this is a lesson that I have to learn. I'm frequently moving forward fast, and I do not take the time to say thank you. The FAQ that we released last month was really a labor of love. We've been working on it inside of ACL and inside of Office of Independent Living Programs for some time. But I have to thank everyone who provided feedback and guidance for us throughout this. What we've seen, you had questions, you were candid, you allow us to learn from your experiences. We especially appreciate those who engage with us in real time during active disasters. We know how your time is busy during that. So we really do appreciate those folks. The folks in Florida during hurricanes a few years ago, we worked closely with them in Hawaii and throughout the country. So today we're going to discuss 3 of the FAQs. They're a great FAQ, and if you haven't already had a chance to review them, please take a look. It really does include a lot of good information. But today we're going to focus on this portion. We're going to focus on 3 questions that we think will be useful for everyone. We know that everyone is at different levels of where they go and where they are. So I'm going to jump right into this. So let's go to the next one. Next slide, please. So what role does the state plan for independent living and SILCs and SILs play in emergency and disaster response? Well, that's kind of a loaded question. I would say that it all depends on what it is that they need in their community. Every community is different. So I'm going to go right to Shaylin. And Shaylin, what are some of the things that SILCs and SILs have been doing to prepare for emergencies or response to disaster?
This is Shaylin. Thanks, Ed. And I just want to really reiterate some of the facts that we wanted to really ground us in this conversation today. One being that people with disabilities are 2 to 4 times more likely to die or be injured in disasters and conflicts than non-disabled people. So that is a disproportionate impact that we face before, during, and after disasters and emergencies. And as we all well know, people with disabilities make up 27% of our US population, and disasters are increasing in frequency and intensity, which is really driving pieces of our conversation today. To the first question that we're addressing here on what role does the state plan for independent living and SILCs and SILs play in emergency preparedness and disaster response? One is to look at your SPIL, your state plan on independent living, as a place to identify and start working on your commitment in this major area that certainly impacts all aspects of our independent living and the independent living network. So we'll get into some other examples around that throughout the webinar today. But one thing is to just look at this as a place to really identify that you're committed to responding to, preparing for, and recovering from disasters and emergencies as an IL network. We've seen this as a way for SILs and SILCs to be powerful assets in their disaster response and preparedness and recovery in their communities. We've also seen as a role that SILCs and SILs play, acting as a convener to bring key stakeholders together when preparing for, responding to, and recovering from disasters and emergencies. We've seen, for example, you'll hear from Beth Mayer from Florida's State Independent Living Council, where she often, especially in Florida and other hurricane really impacted areas, come together as they see hurricanes approaching, bring key SILs and impacted areas together, and other key stakeholders like Red Cross, your local emergency managers, public health, and other first responders together to the same table to really address those problems, to identify solutions and work on them together. And we've seen similarly SILs do similar work in bringing together the local stakeholders in your very localized community and other partners that help you meet the needs of the disability community throughout disasters. We've also seen in a lot of different examples and ways that we'll also touch upon today is ways that Centers for Independent Living have acted as that first line response, meeting the immediate needs of the disaster and disability impacted community with things like replacing durable medical equipment or assistive technology, providing information and referral services and information around the available disaster services in your community, providing that individual and of course systemic advocacy on disability rights in the context of that immediate disaster and what is either happening on an individual level or systemically in the response mechanisms, and providing that peer support to our local communities. And working as always to divert and transition people from institutions before, during, and after disasters. Those all sound like your 5 core services, and we'll continue to touch upon those and ways that we can embed emergency and disaster aspects into all of our core services and aspects that we do.
And I want to add on to that. This is Ed. Keep in mind that your community is your community. You're impacted by certain types of disasters. So what you do in your area may be completely different. So don't feel like you need to fit in. You are the masters of your community. You have a best pulse of it. So yeah, just feel free to go with your flow. Next slide, please. We'll go on to the next question. What types of federally declared disasters or emergencies should SILs and SILCs consider when developing emergency operations plans or goals within the SPIL? Well, first I'd like to say is when we talk about disaster, and Shailen's going to talk a minute about federal disasters, but one of the things I want to talk about is, again, disasters are not all hurricanes coming in and wrecking the coast or wildfires burning half of the state. You know, emergencies and disasters are local. So a school shooting, a dam breach, those types of things, a train derailment, are all things that may not rise to a level, but are certainly an impact to the local community. So again, back to taking an assessment of your area and what you're concerned with and what your needs of your community are. Those are some of the ways that you can look at what you should be involved in.
This is Shailen, and I'm going to add a resource in the chat from FEMA, which talks about how a disaster gets declared and what we mean when we say the words federally declared disaster. As you'll see, it's mentioned a number of times throughout the FAQ. And in short, we really just want to emphasize that a declared disaster really means that the local community and local government agencies have reached or exceeded their capacity to respond, and they are requesting support and assistance from the federal government. And that is where you see the president declaring a major disaster for different localities after an event. It can take some time for that process to actually take to place and actually be declared after an actual disaster occurs due to risk assessments and other types of assessments that have to occur for that declaration to happen. But as Ed said, these are all disasters could really get to this point of a federally declared disaster if the local capacity is exceeded their resources and needing support from federal government. And as Ed said, local response is local. Disasters are very localized, and that is why it's really important to be connected with your local emergency management agency and know those key stakeholders to work together. And we'll get into some more of that soon too.
Sometimes when a disaster does not initially meet the level for federally declared disaster, it's important for you to catalog if you think there's enough destruction or needs to communicate with your emergency management agency. Oftentimes, a disaster is declared days after, and you see support starting to go in. Hurricanes, wildfires are good examples. However, just last week, we saw a federally declared disaster be issued for New Hampshire rains in December and January. And just last week, the federally declared disaster was instituted. So it's important to also track the impacts in the disability community.
And I think overall, and I'm sure Ed would agree with us on this note, is that you do not need a federally declared disaster to respond to your community's needs or support your community. So any disaster localized is really important that you're involved in reaching out to your local communities.
Great, thank you. Let's move to question 3 because these questions are important. We'll have lots of discussions around this, but we think you're going to really find benefit from your colleagues who have experienced this. So question 3, this is the #1 question that we get is, our SIL is new to engaging in disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. Where do we start? Well, you start where you think you should start. You start by talking to your people. You start talking about, what do they need? What does your community mean? What is a historic look at how your community has fared during disaster? Lots of ways, but some simple ways. Couple of first steps. Shaylin?
This is Shaylin. First and foremost, having those relationships with your local emergency management agency can really make a difference. And one thing I've really learned, and I know that you all can relate to in different works that you've done within your Centers for Independent Living, is the importance of those personal relationships with the people that you know at those agencies, and making sure that you have those relationships and are nurturing them. So inviting them to your tables and events, and vice versa, inviting yourself to their events or attending things that are happening locally within your local emergency management agency. Oftentimes, and a lot of times, and also a role that we could play as SILs is supporting those entities creating task force or committees focused on people with disabilities in disasters and emergencies, as another example. Some other places to start at is, when a disaster occurs, reaching out to your local community, contacting your consumers and checking in and seeing that they're safe, if they need any support with things like evacuation, food, or water. And then integrating, as I touched upon a little earlier, disaster preparedness activities into your core services. Things like when you're conducting IL skills training and cooking classes, for examples, integrating what you could eat or how to prepare food when a power outage has occurred, helping people think through and write out what their plans may be in different types of disasters, who their support networks is, making sure folks have a copy of their essential documents and equipment labeled, making sure that you have a list of resources and information to share in a disaster or an emergency through your INR support. And of course, as always, using our advocacy skills to continue to support people with disabilities live independently throughout disasters, and also advocating for disability rights on a systemic level.
Thank you. Thank you. So as you can see, these questions, I think, on our FAQ cover a broad range of things. We could spend all day talking about it, and frankly, we would love to. But we want to move on to things. You know, we will have ongoing discussions about these FAQs. There's lots of ways to get involved. You'll hear more about them throughout this. But what I'd like to do now is shift from the FAQ. And I want to start to hear from our panelists. So, Shaylin.
This is Shaylin. Thank you, Ed. And thank you to Jim, Beth, and Sarah who are joining us today to have and share more about their experience and work around disasters and emergencies through their statewide Independent Living Council or their Center for Independent Living. So we're excited to start off with Jim House from Washington State Independent Living Council to talk more and share about the importance of SILCs in planning and organizing throughout the state. Off to you, Jim.
Hello. I want to make sure that the interpreter can see me clearly. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Jim House. I'm the Disability Integration Manager and for the Coalition on Inclusive Emergency Planning. We call that CIEP, and my visual description is I have glasses on, I have a white beard and gray hair. So I was involved in Northern Virginia and in an independent living center there, and I've transferred over to Washington State, where I dealt with accessibility and technology as it relates to.
Can I interrupt?
Yes. Hold on one second for the interpreter.
Yeah.
Hold on 1 second. And is the interpreter spotlighted? Because I don't think Jim is able to see me to get, okay. Yes.
It is hard to hear you, Antonio.
Okay, hold on 1 second to make sure Jim is clear what's happening. Let me try another system.
Would you like for me to take over? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hold on.
Okay, is this better? Can anyone hear me now? Is this better?
Yes.
Is it better?
If you could do it a little bit louder, that would be great. But I think it's better.
What about now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
And Jim is saying, okay, I'll just start, I'll go back. And I'll just start from the top. My name is Jim House. I am the Disability Integration Manager for the Coalition on Inclusive Emergency Planning. It is a statewide advisory group, and it's connected to emergency planning and accessibility and access and functional needs. My pronouns are he and him, and my visual description is I have glasses on, and I have a white beard and gray hair. And I have a dark shirt, button-down shirt. I used to work for the Independent Living Center located in Northern Virginia, near Washington, D.C. areas. And then I transferred to an advocacy organization, TDI, working with telephone access for the deaf and hard of hearing, and also advocated with the FCC in regards to communications access services, dealing with captioning, as well as emergency communications like 911, and information would be alerted or shared as an alert about disasters around the country, et cetera. And I worked in that division as well. And from there, I moved to Washington State as a disability advocate group in Seattle, I worked with that group, and then that's when I also started working with CIEP. One key thing about independent living centers is people with disability have skill sets. We want to keep that in mind. So I worked with the Washington State Independent Living Center Council as an advocate. And people who are on the panel, who are government appointed, 90% of them have a disability. The council has developed state planning for independent living centers, well, otherwise called SPIL, SPIL, to be in compliance with the larger role of the CIEP that I mentioned, Coalition on Inclusive Emergency Planning. So that organization plays a major role inside of local communities. The CIEP meets monthly, usually via Zoom, fully accessible, providing sign language interpreting services and captioning. And it's about 30 or 40 people join every month. And our discussions are related to coordination and council members advocacy, also with tribal organizations as well, and a variety of different agencies. And they're usually community-based organizations that are also a part of the stakeholders for the CIEP and other independent living centers. We have 4 independent living centers. And we serve 21 out of 93 counties. So we provide basically 5 services. The coordination for the inclusion on emergency planning in the Washington State for independent living centers started about 10 years ago. There was a discussion that started one day actually before the worst landslide event that hit a town called Oso in Washington. 43 people died from that event. And it wiped out whole communities there. It showed a lot of access and functional needs were not being met in general, based on what we observed during this emergency. And so we needed a group to really do a deep dive into what was going on around access and functional needs. So statewide disability network was involved in blue sky planning, development, and coordination. So it was stood up during the disaster recovery, and we brought skilled skills that were necessary for dealing with and training that were necessary for dealing with recovery after such a disaster. And it was people who have disabilities using the idea not for us, without us. So, and also statutes that apply to emergency responses. And we learned from a lot of other different disasters that occurred, wildfires, and a variety of other natural disasters that occurred around the county, around the country, to apply successful AFN, access and functional needs responses, to things like wildfires. And particularly, for instance, in Spokane, Washington, that occurred last year, we were able to apply what we learned to that situation. So we have a 360 view approach for the CMIST people who need access and have functional needs that may not necessarily have a disability, but there are a variety of groups. For instance, people who are without homes or people who have no transportation might fit the bill for needing access and functional needs requirements. And it might be a temporary need. It might be a recent disability that has occurred. So we're looking at the community as a whole, and we're applying CMIST to it. And we invite a variety of stakeholders, those who can't survive if they don't have access to these particular 5 things. C would be communication. M would be maintaining health. I, independence. S is self-determination and support. And T means transportation. So using that CMIST model, like what happened in Baltimore, we heard yesterday. Let's see, I used to live about 20 minutes from that bridge. So I understand the impact in that area. Also, we're looking at 3 particular things to make sure that coverage occurs: effective communications access, programmatic access, and physical access. These are 3 areas that we focus on. Regarding effective communication, we partner with the Office for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing and developing signed emergency videos that would include captioning as well for people who may not understand sign language. And also, there would be a transcript that could provide access to people who are deaf-blind, meaning they are both deaf and blind. And so we've tested it, and we've learned a few things through the test run. And so to make sure that there was a fast turnaround time so that it could be distributed publicly and widely across the networks that were developed. Also, before COVID, we were in the process of developing a disaster interpreter training program. And during COVID, many new issues cropped up. For example, regarding technology, before COVID, we weren't using Zoom. And now we use Zoom daily. And how does that apply to our training? We had to consider that. Last year, we took up the issue of AFN, access and functional needs. We took a trip around that. There was 4 of us. And we wanted to, you might know Todd Howie. He's works with FEMA for us. He's our FEMA go-to person and AFN specialist for state emergency management. And a few others, the 4 of us went around Washington, both West and East Washington, visiting disability partners, having conversations with them, finding out how we could be of assistance around access and functional needs. And then 4 or 5 months later, the wildfires in Spokane hit. Deaf people, there are several who lost their homes, people evacuated quickly and had to leave medications that they have to take frequently and daily. And so we helped to replace those types of things. And because of that, because of the road trip actually that we took, that was able to have a successful response to those wildfires. That allowed us to have a successful response to those wildfires. Now, regarding programmatic access, we're increasing access and functional needs skills at the statewide level. So the tribal level as well as local levels have also been increased. Like in 2022, I'll give you an example. I was involved with writing a white paper that convinced the legislators to pass a bill and setting up an AFM specialist position. And so we now have partnered with the emergency management and disaster preparation and focusing on having an AFN specialist. And that has helped out a great deal, particularly with last year and the fires that took place in Spokane. There are also different groups that were established for different work groups for EMD that focused on ESF6, emergency functions number 6. For instance, shelter and feeding when necessary, and preparation for such disasters in regards to what happened with how we use our team for preparing for disaster relief. We were able to discuss, and the interpreter's clarifying, and we were able to discuss in a particular situation with Cascadia, we were able to have a table discussion and meeting around the earthquake that impacted access and functional needs. And so we found a lot of information in regards to communication, system breakdowns, plus transportation. During the earthquake, there were lots of bridges were damaged. Maybe at another time, it was even worse. And particularly with this time, it was worse than what had occurred historically. And then there was the planning for calling other people back, like repatriation planning. It was important. An important part of access to have people come back to monitor access and functional needs. And I got your warning, your 3-minute warning. Thank you. Now, the third part, physical access. As having funding, like we did have funding for COVID, using those particular funds was key. It was key to being able to integrate all emergency services and modify programs to accommodate access and functional needs. And then there was no extra budgeting costs. People could trust emergency accessibility services as well. And that's the presentation. Are there any questions?
This is Herman. Thank you, Jim. Folks can put their questions in the chat or the FAQ. And
The Q&A.
Yes, Q&A. And if there are further questions, we can come back to you, Jim. Thank you. Why don't we move to the next slide and hear from Beth Mayer.
Hello. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Beth Meyer. I'm with the Florida SILC. I'm the executive director here. I am an older lady with long gray hair and glasses, but I'm thrilled to be here. I'm very excited about this because this is an opportunity for us to talk about some common areas and get a common ground from ACL. Appreciate all the work that has been put into this, and I appreciate ACL understanding there's a need here. So I think it's great. So I'm going to start with understanding your state's disaster response process and who the state stakeholders are. And so it's important as a SILC to understand that you have a unique role, that when there's a disaster, you're able to provide a communication platform for your impacted SILs, but invite everyone, because they all are partnering and working together. But your state stakeholders and your state partners, those people you can start developing a relationship with in blue skies before a disaster. Understand the governmental and non-governmental partners that your state relies on for assistance during a disaster. And that's kind of easy to do, to go back and look at some of your state's communications from your governor's office. Many times we, go back to an executive order from the governor, and then those communications that come out of the office. It really does provide you a list of the people that the state is relying on at a state level to work with our counties. So counties are where the action is, and that's where our SILs are. So if your SILs are, boots on the ground, so to speak, you want to be able to take a moment and pull together some of that really important support for them to do their job. They might not have access to internet that's reliable, but there are ways that you can collectively bring that information to them. The work that the SILs do in a state at the county level, it is critical. It's a big deal. And as a SILC, you want to be part of the solution by providing those avenues for connectivity for your SILs. You don't want to be part of the problem, right? So the work that the SILs do is really important. And I'm waiting for the interpreter. Yeah. You let me know if when you're good. You're good. Okay. All right. So your SILs are a critical part of what's happening, and getting the information to to the community. We want some of the things that you might, if you go back and look at who the stakeholders are, you might see something that was mentioned, durable medical equipment was a huge need. Well, sometimes a state will go out and bring in durable medical equipment. We don't, from another state. And we know that our SILs and the great work that they do, they have durable medical equipment, and they are ready to use it and to work with the community. They know their community better than anyone. Why do we need necessarily someone else who doesn't know the community coming in? And you can really lift up your SILs and by providing and talking about some of the great things they do at the state level. So you just really want to have an understanding of that. Take a moment before a disaster and talk to your SILs. What are they doing? You might be surprised, and it's really great as a SILC to learn about something that you maybe have no idea of some of the work that they do, whether it's preparedness work, whether they're asking their consumers disaster response information or disaster preparedness information in their CSRs. These are really good pieces of information because it gives you a starting board for where you need to go and what else can you do by connecting the state and the counties with our SILs. So the SILs have a really good opportunity to showcase the great work that they're doing. And it's really, I think, added value to the community because of their because they know the community, whether it's providing interpreter services and working and collaborating together. In the FAQs, Question number three, about the SILs working outside of possibly their catchment area, that came out of ACL really listening, because when a disaster happens, we want our SILs to work together because they want to provide those services to their community. So understanding and providing as a SILC a platform of comparing peer-to-peer. It's not the SILC telling our SILs, well, you need to do this and you need to do that. It's peer-to-peer, providing that opportunity for one executive director to speak to another executive director, and you can just learn by their communications, if you're providing that platform. So peer-to-peer, they're able to share best practices. And by providing that platform, you're able to have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about your SILs and some of the work that that they're doing. Okay, the state plan. State plan is critical to getting having goals and objectives and activities is critical to getting your SILC into those state emergency management table, to that table. That's the table you need to be at, and understanding that. So, use your SPIL to collect information from your SILs to provide you a opportunity to go to the next level with your state, and ask those questions so that they're able to capture the information. If they can capture the information through the SPIL, you saved your SILs time, and that is important. So I think I'm being told my time is up. Thank you so much for everything.
This is Shaylin, and thank you, Beth, as always, for all that you do and continue to support us all in learning from the work that you all have been doing in Florida around this. So thank you so much for joining us today. Next, we're going to hear from colleague Sarah Launderville from Vermont, who will share more about the role of Centers for Independent Living in disasters, public health emergencies, and establishing networks and some examples from that. So I'll pass it to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be with you all here today. My name is Sarah Launderville. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Center for Independent Living. I'm a white woman with brown hair, and I'm wearing glasses, and I'm in my home office today. So I want to talk about the role of the Center for Independent Living in disaster and really supporting staff. There's so much that everyone has said already today that is just so impactful. So I just want to say thank you for that. When we think of a Center for Independent Living and our philosophy and how programming is built, we all know that it starts with the community needs. What are people with disabilities in our community experiencing? And what do we do to help advocate for stronger systems? There is absolutely nothing more grounding than an emergency, and especially if you're unprepared for that emergency. And in my recent experience, especially even when you've done all that prep work, many things can change in a moment. People you built relationships with are suddenly not available. Access to structures, technology, road, all of a sudden are not available, and you will need to pivot. In my opinion, the Center for Independent Living needs to be front and center in that work. Otherwise, as everything moves, it will do so without a response that is calling attention to access issues and discrimination. And it will move along swiftly. We found out that part of our job is to remind leaders and those running different systems that things need to be done right the first time. Outside entities will come in and support, but we are the local organization, the trusted group in the community that will help bridge that relationship and also make sure that the outside entities aren't bringing additional headache or actual damage to our community. Like others in the past few years, we've been responding to a pandemic, and the world continues to pull back funding, supports, and policies that helped protect us during this time. And the emergency for us has grown exponentially. I just want to say out loud and clear, the pandemic is not over. While many people have moved on, there's like this nothing here type of attitude. Disabled people are left more alone and without resources. And in addition, people and organizations are also being gaslit and making it even harder for individuals to survive. It's important for us to talk frankly about this as an emergency because it is. It needs to be highlighted in state independent living plans, and centers need to keep planning and responding. In July, Vermont had a flood that tore through communities and exacerbated issues we've been drawing attention to for years. For example, people with disabilities experiencing homelessness. And as a center, our most important work is responding to the community need and supporting our peers. And in order to do that, we need a staff who is prepared for that response. What becomes something that can't be overlooked is how staff are doing. In the most recent flooding, the VCIL Central Office was absolutely destroyed, and we're still rebuilding at this point, as are many buildings in downtown Montpelier. Our staff responded, and at the same time, they were trying to muck out their own basements and then spend the day trying to ensure our peers had shelter, access to food and medicine, fight the discrimination, only to return home to their own disaster fallout. The stress levels and isolation, the feeling like we're not all in this together grows stronger. And I can't stress enough how important it is to help find ways to support your staff during that time. Every organization is a little bit different, so you should build that into a way that works for you. Board members are needed quickly in these situations too. As part of planning, it's important to build in how that might look. Having access to be able to share the needs, get approvals for potential large spending, access to insurance, and potential policy changes are very important. Having board members that are good at slowing a process to have an impactful conversation, but they're also swiftly making decisions. And that's when having a strong board already really helps a lot. So what I've also learned in the different types of emergencies and disasters is that people coming to help at the centers, and we don't all, quote, speak the same language. And I mean that literally and figuratively. It's really important that in an emergency, everyone is given important, especially real-time information in language that's accessible to them. We did a ton of work in our community when the pandemic began around the governor's live press conferences, as many of you have, and making sure that an American Sign Language interpreter was available. And we thought that that was baked right into procedures. And when the flood alerts began, there was no interpreter at the first briefing. Plain language, live captioning, ASL interpretation, language translation services must be happening. The opportunity is lost when it's not, and we all know people can get hurt or die just because they don't have the same level of information as people without disabilities. I also learned quickly that when FEMA and other entities come into the state, there are ways that they can support the work, and there are limitations to that support. And the time to work closely with those groups and get to know them is not at the height of an emergency. Having solid relationships go a long way. VCIL held daily check-ins with FEMA and the disability community when the flood hit, so that we were able to share real-time discrimination in shelters, and our liaison helped us solve those issues. When we got daily updates in the shelter system, funding for individuals, and trainings for our staff to help people get registered and paperwork submitted. What I want to leave you with is the absolute importance of advocacy and response at the local level. Between the examples I've highlighted with the flooding and the pandemic, we saw an influx of helpers and volunteers and mutual aid groups. One thing we should talk about is helpers don't always ask. We know this is a community, and it's been that way for people who have been trying to help us for years, but I was reminded again what this looked like for us. Local volunteers don't always seem to understand accessibility, including mutual aid groups, the ADA, the needs of people with disabilities. I actually found it easier to deal with state and federal organizations because they have responsibilities under the law, and we can easily push back. But what about that one person who volunteers to bring together a community conversation on their own time with a bunch of people show up, but the event isn't accessible? Planning needs to include ways that this doesn't happen. The pushback came like, I'm just trying to help. We need to do this quickly, or we don't have any money. So you're trying to deal with all of that, the local relationships, at the same time of dealing with the emergency and ensuring that everyone has their access needs met. It becomes messy, and in our experience, long-term relationships were also impacted. It's really important to plan around that ahead of time and utilize all the important connections. And when the advocacy isn't enough and your government turns away from you, build it yourself. Find resources, keep saying the harms to our community, and move it forward. We've done that. When our Vermont Department of Health decided that they would no longer offer accessible vaccines, we built it. CCL's Pandemic Equity Coordinator, Kate LaRose, secured a U.S. aging grant, and we built home-based vaccine programs. We vaccinate in homes and facilities all over Vermont. And that might not seem exceptional, but when you build a program and the usual players are all against you and putting up barriers because of politics, it is exceptional. When the Department of Health stood in the way of getting masks to long-term care facilities, our prisons, people in the community, we started ordering, creating hubs, and distributing high-quality N95 respirators. And over the past year alone, we've accepted over 15 pallets, which is about $300,000 worth of high-quality masks and respirators. We created partnerships with the National Guard to help distribute to prisons and congregate facilities. And we have a Google map highlighting the 70-plus statewide distribution center for tests since December. When tests were no longer made available, we built that too. Since November, we've been told that since when, we keep hearing that the pandemic is over, we've distributed over 450,000 rapid antigens. And since July, over 3,000 molecular tests. This is all in the past year. It doesn't include all of the work since 2020. All done with a team of 2 part-time. I'm going to add a link in the chat so you can find all details about our pandemic equity work. And that site also has trainings, including an emergency preparation workshop series that we put on. We dedicated resources to plan and also provide participants $300 to purchase some materials for their own toolkit. And it was pretty widely, really individualized in what people could purchase to try to make sure that they were safe in their own home pre-emergency. And that was a partnership between our State Independent Living Council and our center. I think I'm out of time, I'm not sure, but thank you so much. And I really appreciate being here today.
This is Shaylin, and thank you so much, Sarah, for all of those wonderful examples, for all that you all continue to do in Vermont. And also thank you to our other panelists, Beth and Jim, for your examples and work with statewide independent living councils. We've noticed a number of questions coming into the Q&A, and we've been addressing some of them as they come, but please keep adding those questions as they come to you, as we will have a section very shortly to really dive into some of these questions and answers. But next I'll pass it to Ed so we can jump into the next piece of our conversation.
Okay, this is Ed. Thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers. Really great information. So now we're going to get down into the weeds a little bit. We're going to dig down and start talking about some ideas for SPIL goals. You'll soon learn that many goals being considered by SILCs are also goals that can be individualized for use in SILs. So I want to turn this over to Ahern to talk a little bit about some of the work that SILs and SILCs have been doing with setting up goals. Ahern?
This is Ahern. Thank you so much, Ed. On the slide, you'll see disaster and emergency SPIL, SIL goals, a series of bullets, getting started, how to expand on what you have in your SPIL, its own goal, objectives within a goal, and customized to meet the needs of your community. I read them so we can all have an idea of what we're going to run through the next few minutes. And as some of you have been doing, if ideas of what you have been including in your SPIL or SILS goal come to mind, please add them in the chat of what they look like or what they could look like that you've been thinking or learned through this presentation. But getting started, if you're at that level, start small. Conduct community meetings, surveys, and listening sessions focused to understand the needs and concerns of your consumers when it relates to disasters. Another idea, if you're just getting started, is, as Ed mentioned, and we've been talking throughout, dedicate goals in your state plan for independent living, not only related to preparedness, but also consider response goals and recovery goals. And many of you do have goals related to COVID-19. As Sarah just mentioned, the pandemic it continues to impact our community and disproportionately. Consider broadening those goals to encompass all types of hazards, not just related to public health emergencies. Now, some of you have begun some goals and objectives related to disasters in your SPIL. Why don't we talk about how can we begin to expand them? Consider developing communication strategies to effectively reach and assist consumers during disasters. We know that staying informed, making a plan, and exercising that plan is our mantra in emergency management. But it's important to not just do it once and put it to the side and continue strengthening all your activities. And communication is crucial to keeping our community informed. And let's not forget that many times emergency broadcasts are not fully inclusive of our access needs. So you are serving a crucial actor in the disaster response when you're communicating activities in an accessible manner to your community. And strengthen partnerships with local emergency management agencies. And we saw in the Q&A that some people express difficulty with your emergency management agencies taking us seriously. We have found that things that can help is speaking their language. As in the disability community, it's crucial that we know how to address each individual. Learning the lingo found, for example, in the National Incident Management System language can help bridge those gaps. But also come to the table with what you have to offer. Demonstrate to them how your communities are disproportionately impacted, how you are a trusted source for people with disabilities, and that they ultimately need to work with you so they can do their job right.
And I'd like to jump in. This is Ed. You know, we as people with disabilities are very well aware that many times people think they know what's best for us. So us as independent living centers really need to really push that nothing about us without us piece. So when you hear we've got everything covered, you have to utilize your personality skills and push back a little and say, well, maybe you don't. So let's work together.
Thank you, Ed. Absolutely. Other areas that you could continue developing own goals and objectives within goals. An objective could be contracts or memorandums of understanding, MOUs, with your local emergency management to do response activities. I think you're SIL, right? You work at a SIL, Shayla?
I did.
What was his name?
Roads to Freedom, Center for Independent Living in North Central Pennsylvania.
And have they been successful in establishing relationship with their emergency management?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Yes.
How so?
During the COVID pandemic, when COVID was made a presidentially declared disaster, which allowed for additional FEMA funding to go to localities. We supported Roads to Freedom. We at the partnership supported Roads to Freedom in really connecting with their local emergency management agency, creating an MOU between their entity and the emergency management agency in order to access some of the FEMA federal assistance through the public assistance program in their work to support people in nursing homes and other nursing facilities, relocate, transition out through emergency relocation while they temporarily stayed in hotels with wraparound services and other supports, and then ultimately transitioning that long-term transition plan. It's something that was a big process, a lot of work and a lot of advocacy, but something that Roads to Freedom has proven that can be done.
Thank you, Shaylin. Other objectives could be conduct disaster shelter assessments, right? We all know that we have shelters for people experiencing homelessness, and during disasters, disaster shelters are open, and you could work with your locality to conduct accessibility assessments on them. Right now, we are supporting the Center for Independent Living in Puerto Rico, MAVI, conduct this actual objective across all their municipalities. You could disseminate readiness information, and as Shaylin mentioned earlier in the beginning, disaster-related information for your consumers as they begin calling your INR. You could also provide essential services. The Centers for Independent Living in Florida are one great example. There are many that right after the disasters, they contact their consumers, check what could be their needs, and when needed, deliver food, water, immediate essentials. And they are able to do this by coordinating with their state emergency management agency. Now, we heard from Florida, Vermont, and Washington. Thank you, Beth, Sarah, and Jim again. In their goals, Florida, its goal number 4 is a broad-ranging, all-encompassing activity. It reads, disaster preparedness, response, recovery, resulting in systemic change. People with disabilities will have equal access to the community resources as a result of disasters, natural or human-made, civil unrest, mass shootings, technical, and cybersecurity breaches. Vermont's goal number 1 states expansion of independent living in Vermont, and it has subsections. First, the IL partners will consider emergency preparedness for people with disabilities to be the utmost importance, and have stated to educate citizens with disability and organizations on developing preparedness plans and information intake processes. And in the Vermont SPIL, it incorporates emergency preparedness throughout the SPIL goals and objectives. And Washington's first goal is Washingtonians with disabilities receive community integration and community-based living supports to become more independent in the community of choice through independent living. And it breaks that goal into 2 objectives. Objective 1, emergency preparedness, and Objective 2, a coalition on inclusive emergency preparedness. One other example we want to share with you is South Carolina's goal number 2, which states South Carolinians with disabilities are prepared for emergencies. And they meet frequently and ahead of disasters and through disasters with all of their SILs, and they invite public health and emergency management from state to county levels. It's a promising practice that all can begin preparing for today. In the chat, Jim does add in Washington, the FAST teams, and FAST stands for
Functional Assessment. Oops, the acronym JAR, I'm gonna owe some money towards.
We'll come back to that. Right now we're having a little break.
Sorry, FAST, F-A-S-T, Functional Assessment Service Team.
And thank you also, Dija, for putting it in the chat. These are some overarching goals and objectives within goals that you can take and customize to meet the needs of your local communities. You've heard now enough of me, and we heard many great ideas from our speakers. We would like to hear from you all and begin going into a question and answer session. And some of you have put questions in the Q&A already. We have answered a number of them. Please keep them coming.
Great. Thank you very much, Herman and Shaylin. One very last thing about goals and stuff, you know, it could really be small and something as little as setting up a subcommittee to your SILC to discuss the topics. You know, it's a small step with huge impact. So very excited. All right, now we are going to, get to some of the most important part of this. And that is hearing from you. So what we're going to start doing is getting some of these questions. Again, many of them have been answered. And so let's jump right into them.
Hi, this is Mary Kate. So, and also too, I'll be collecting all the links that are shared in the chat and Q&A to send out to folks because that's been a question. So the first question I see is how to advocate and be involved in the triage process where people with disabilities may not be getting the assistance or priority.
So this is Ed. I'll start with that. And I'll let my colleagues jump in. It starts with the conversations, you communicating to your local community that the needs are not being met and showing data that will support that. That's a first great step, is bringing awareness to it. Because again, emergency management may think everything's great, so they need you as a reality check. Others?
This is Herman. Another idea is to communicate with who leads Emergency Support Function 6, Mass Care, in your state, and create an MOU with them that you will collaborate in disasters. The triage part may be complicated at first. I wouldn't use that terminology, but because of the fast-moving pace of disasters in those first 12 to 24 hours, as they're setting up shelters and allowing everyone in that day and they should. But Florida is another example. Again, they have written and collaborated with Emergency Support Function 6 and 8, Public Health, to go into shelters and talk to the disability community of different access needs. And it can be a very productive relationship.
And you can just offer, this is Ed, you can just offer to have, to do some disability awareness training to your emergency management structure. Could be a great first step as well.
Right. And Herman, can you put in the chat you said like functional area 6 or 8, just so that make sure folks have that reference? Thanks.
And I did put a link in the chat to the emergency support functions earlier,
Great.
so it does have it in there as well.
Perfect. Okay. On to the next question. This is from June. I think it's directed to Sarah. So if Sarah, you want to come on screen, can you talk more about the daily meetings you had with FEMA after the floods? Who participated? Were you the convener? Can you give an example of the problem solving that occurred?
Okay, I think I have all the, if I don't answer part of it, tell me. This is Sarah. So initially, the convener, I guess, was the CIL, or Vermont Center for Independent Living, and FEMA together. We had some previous experiences from our regional person, Kate, during Tropical Storm Irene, which really devastated a lot of Vermont at that time. So And at that time, I'm pretty sure the convener, it was similar, but it was Disability Rights Vermont, which is our protection and advocacy. So it really could be any of them. Sometimes it really depends on who's impacted, who's not impacted, and who can step up to an emergency in that moment. So building in like with the other groups. And so what we did was we reached out to, we have the Vermont Coalition for Disability Rights, so a bunch of different disability groups. So our Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired, our Developmental Disabilities Council, our Psychiatric Survivor Group, the State Independent Living Council, Deaf Community, and then a bunch of like state divisions as well. And so initially it really was more of the disability component of those groups. And I think, I met Ed through that as well as other ACL folks. Peter and I, our program manager at ACL, joined those initial calls. So like we were trying to just kind of find that grounding. The cool thing is the good thing for us in some ways is we started those out, but then once the emergency was declared, FEMA had resources. They could help pay for our live captioning and our ASL interpretation at the Zoom meeting. So that was really helpful. And then the types of things, it was really varied. I think one of the first things was there was a pharmacy that people couldn't get to anymore in a certain area of the state. So it was like really specific. How do we help come together and get people prescriptions that they needed that they didn't have access to? When the sheltering system got up and running, we heard from a disabled person who's also trans that they were told by a volunteer that they couldn't use the bathroom, that they had to use the other bathroom. And so we got right on that and got some support from FEMA around that. And then there were some policy issues. I won't go on too much longer, but I think like the interesting part for me was that, FEMA comes in and they know what they know and that they have to do. And we're here knowing all of just the political nature, the policy issues that our state was already dealing with. And so the issue of homelessness in our state and the amount of people with disabilities experiencing homelessness is huge. And so that kind of just the whole issue exploded more. And so having conversations to help them understand sort of the state of the state, because they're getting their direction from state officials and not advocates. And so there's a lot of messiness that can come up. And so having those daily check-ins are really important to kind of move forward the needle. I could go on, but I will stop.
Thank you, Sarah. This is Mary Kate. And just to note to folks, we might not get to all the questions, but we are capturing them so that we can continue this conversation. And also just a note that the evaluation link is in the chat. But back to questions. There is a question: what AFN, which is Access and Functional Needs Training, would you recommend to ILCs to start teaching DAFN members about? So from someone from our panel. Go ahead, Shaylin and Herman.
This is Shaylin. I'll get us started, and others, please feel free to chime in. I think Ed touched upon this a little bit. One area is really just starting with the basics, disability awareness trainings, and making sure that folks are on the same page, that we're not continuously using medical model approaches and other outdated language that we always see in different spaces. And making sure that folks are understanding where we're coming from as the disability community, and us also understanding their lingo and where they're coming from on the emergency management side. And then as you start building those relationships, really building upon sort of those topics, moving from disability awareness to maybe disability bias and mitigation of disability bias. And then going into disability rights and obligations. It's a big piece that, we at the partnership do a lot of trainings about for Centers for Independent Livings to continue to educate in their communities, for local emergency management agencies. And a lot of times we find when we do those sort of what we would consider, all of us in SIL worlds and SILCs and the disability community, of sort of that basics of disability rights, we find that it's a really big value for emergency managers, for us within the disability community, to be rehearing that information, either relearning it or learning it for the first time, and making sure that those pieces, those critical pieces that we've touched upon even here, shelter assessments, equally effective communication, these types of pieces are being incorporated in all aspects of emergency operations.
And this is Ed, on the other side too, there's a range of courses too and knowledge that we can bring to it for you to educate your centers about disaster. A lot of some basic courses because you may want to come up to speed on some of that. So there are great resources we could provide on that as well.
Great, and I see Jim, do you want to add something? Or give us, yep.
Sure, if I could add something else. In the past, when we look at centers for independent living, especially in the past, there was a center that did offer training, and the training was PERS-334. So that training is basically an emergency training that's provided to the community. It's almost like CERT, where it would be a half a day training, maybe a day and a half training up to, and it includes community members, including members with disabilities. And I think that we could have clients that come to those types of meetings, or consumers that come to those types of meetings, and review, of course, the emergency plan as well for the upcoming years, just so everyone has an opportunity to be exposed to that information.
Great, thank you, Jim. I think we have time for one more question, and Ed, I saw this question in the chat. How are ILCs paying for staff time for disaster related work, especially for work during response and recovery? And I think that might be an interesting way to end the conversation. So I don't know if you or a panelist would like to answer that.
Well, this is Ed, and I'll start by saying, the FAQ does talk about how you might use your independent living funds for disaster. But as we know, there is no dedicated funding for that. So I'd rather go to one of our presenters to give an idea of where they can generate some revenue for that.
Great. Does Sarah, Beth, Shaylin?
Just checking, nobody else wanted to take it. We mentioned MOUs. They are on with FEMA and your state emergency management agency. That works on a reimbursement level and can be a lengthy period. It's one option, but not the most sustainable option. Fundraise in disasters. Many local foundations have funds. A short letter saying this is what you're planning to do, and you need so much to accomplish it. So building a relationship with a county, statewide, regional foundation can be really helpful, and has supported many of the SILs here in their disaster response operations. That fundraising capacity will be crucial at this time. And I'll close with, we are hoping to later this year see federal legislation to include emergency rapid funds to ACL beneficiaries, similar to how Florida and Puerto Rico are responding after Ian, but in statute. And as that information comes this summer, we'll share with you all. Back to you, Kate, Mary.
Right. So we are at 1 minute. So I do want to thank everyone very much for joining. And I know we didn't get to all the questions, but we will be adding them all together, and I'm sure having more conversations about this. And I just ask folks, we would greatly appreciate doing our evaluation as well. So Ed, anything in the last 30 seconds?
No, in the last 30 seconds, want to say thank you and let you know that there are vast resources out there. There are people that want to support you. There are organizations that want to support you. And I do know that the partnership has a weekly call that has tons of stakeholders you can come and ask any question to, and you'll probably get lots of answers. So Reach out to your program officer at ACL. We can help to connect you with the resources you need. Thank you again. And thank you to our panelists who really gave a great piece of what it's really like out there. Thank you. And thanks to ILRU.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good rest of your day.